diagonal across the street, and what looks like an old mansion. This actually was initially built in the early 1900s as an apartment building. And it was built as an apartment building. It just had four what were luxury apartments, including had servants' quarters. It was built for folks who were waiting for their mansions to be built, basically, in the area. And so it was built, believe it or not, as transitional housing, as luxurious as these apartments were. That particular building became a funeral home. It was a funeral home for a number of years, and now it's the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity house as part of Wayne State. Young men keep it in pretty good repair. I see some solo cups out there this morning, but it is the weekend, and it is near the end of the semester. I think we're in finals right now. But the fraternity, I think the university actually owns it, but the fraternity has been there for 8-10 years, maybe longer, in that particular spot. That's a good example of at least people who are having, again, their homes built, who are coming to live in the area permanently, ideally. They lived there for a time. Right next door, though, in 1916, the Knickerbocker apartments were built. And the Knickerbocker, of course, it looks much different. It doesn't have only 4 large apartments. There's 22 smaller apartments. And those apartments were built for the working folks, for the administrative workers who were working closer to the downtown area, closer to the city center, and needed a place to live that wasn't so far from downtown. So the Knickerbocker was built. There were other apartment buildings that went up at different times. This apartment building right here, probably the 19-teens. But again, smaller apartments, built more for workers and administrative professionals, things like that, as opposed to the folks who were here permanently living in larger structures. This corner, actually right behind us, where you have, you alright?
I got stuck in my knee, sorry.
Oh, man.
University Towers is actually an apartment building now for graduate housing and some professional offices. It also houses the studios for my favorite radio station, WDET.
This building here?
Yep.
The University Tower?
Yep. So you can see the satellite right there off to the right. And then
it's around the other side of it.
Yeah, exactly. But this, as you might imagine, this glass and concrete tower was not here until relatively recently. In 1883, this was actually a field. This was the ball field for the Detroit Athletic Club. It also was the athletic field for Central High School, which right down, let's use that sandstone colored building that we still affectionately call Old Main. It had a building on it by 1911, I believe, that housed one of the Detroit International Auto Shows. So it was a convention center for a time. It was then, it went somewhat unused until it was redeveloped into a bottling plant for a little soda company that we like to call Vernors. I should say pop. I'm from here. It's pop. It was a pop producer known as Vernors. And Vernors not only occupied the building here on what was this parking lot in this building, but also where this other development that is now an apartment building on Woodward, that was bottling and administration that fronted right on Woodward itself. And whether you remember or whether you don't remember, whether it's some fugue memory that you still have in your brain, there used to be a 55-foot tall neon gnome that used to pour a bottle of Vernors, with neon fizz coming out of it, etc.
Wow.
So it was this neon sign, it was 55 feet tall, and it produced so much heat that it actually had its own air conditioning system. So Vernors was here for from the 50s, right here on this spot, from the 50s until roughly the 80s. They had been sold. Some of their they were also the producers of RC Cola, and RC Cola had been sold off. Vernors had been sold off to a national branding company, and by 1985, 1987, the building was empty. And there were some thoughts. This had already been torn down behind it, but the building on Woodward, there were some thoughts to turn it into housing, turn it into something else, keep the building as much as they could, and redevelop it. Those never came to fruition, and by the early 90s, it was being torn down. In its place, though, you can see that apartment building that will actually pass by. So in 1997, when that apartment building was built, 97 a little bit later, it was actually the first market rent housing, apartment housing in the city of Detroit for 30 years.
Wow.
It wasn't just in Midtown, it was in the whole city. That was the first market rate building that was put in. Folks were either redeveloping properties, or they just weren't doing anything. Their buildings were already there. So, and yes, my brain is pretty intact, but I still have notes because there are a lot of fun things I want to talk about. So, in any event, this gives you an idea, even in a microcosm, of how this area developed. From folks moving from downtown, building houses out this way, needing apartment buildings to house them, folks who were workers living in smaller apartments, sites going through development phases, industry leaving, university buildings coming in. It's just this constant move forward and developing and redeveloping these areas. Across the street, just as an example, not a big fan of this kind of architecture, but it's important to note that here was another spot that had kind of nondescript buildings on it for a period of time, but eventually torn down. The Auburn, when it was built, the Auburn went in the early 2000s. It has, I think there are 40 one-bedroom, two-bedroom, and studio apartments. Typical development style these days, with retail on the lower level and living above. Very consistently occupied though, whether it's by students or instructors or folks who just want to live in this area. So the good thing is that with all this development, whether I like it or not, meaning like what it looks like, because I'm a nostalgic person as far as the architecture is concerned, people are living in it, as opposed to the area being kind of emptied out for a long time.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's stroll and sway.